on nose and chin in what was the ultimate caress of their kind. Since they were escape artists of no mean ability, twice he had had to track and lead them back to camp from forays of their own devising. But the second time he had been caught by Fadakar, the chief of animal control, before he could lock up the delinquents. And the memory of the resulting interview still had the power to make him flush with impotent anger. Shann's explanation had been contemptuously brushed aside, and he had been delivered an ultimatum. If his carelessness occurred again, he would be sent back on the next supply ship to be dismissed without an official sign-off on his work record, thus locked out of even the lowest level of survey for the rest of his life. That was why Garth Torvald's act of the night before had made Shann brave the unknown darkness of Warlock alone when he had discovered that the test animals were gone. He had to locate and return them before Fadakar made his morning inspection. Garth Torvald's attempt to get him into bad trouble had saved his life. Shann cowered back, striving to make his huddled body as small as possible. One of the Throg flyers appeared silently out of the misty amber of the morning sky, hovering over the silent camp. The aliens were coming in to inspect the site of their victory, and the safest place for any Terran now was as far from the vicinity of those silent domes as he could get. Shann's slight body was an asset as he wedged through the narrow mouth of a cleft and so back into the cliff wall. The climb before him he knew in part, for this was the path the wolverines had followed on their two other escapes. A few moments of tricky scrambling, and he was out in a cup-like depression, choked with brush, covered with the purplish foliage of Warlock. On the other side of that was a small cut to a sloping hillside, giving on another valley, not as wide as that in which the camp stood, but one well provided with cover in the way of trees and high-growing bushes. A light wind pushed among the trees, and twice Shann heard the harsh, rasping call of a clack-clack, one of the bat-like leather-winged flyers that layered in pits along the cliff walls. That present snap of two-tone complaint suggested that the land was empty of strangers, for the clack-clacks ferociously and loudly resented encroachment on their chosen hunting territory. Shann hesitated. He was driven by the urge to put as much distance between him and the landing Throg ship as he could, but to arouse the attention of inquisitive clack-clacks was asking for trouble. Perhaps it would be best to keep on along the top of the cliff, rather than risk a descent to take cover in the valley the flyers patrolled. A patch of dust, sheltered by a tooth-shaped projection of rock, gave the Terran his first proof that Taggi and his mate had preceded him. For printed firmly there was a familiar paw mark of a wolverine. Shann began to hope that both animals had taken to cover in the wilderness ahead. He licked dry lips. Having left secretly without any emergency pack, he had no canteen, and now Shann inventoried his scant possessions. A field kit, heavy-duty clothing, a short hooded jacket with attached mittens, the breast marked with the survey insignia. His belt supported a sheath stunner and bush knife, and seam pockets held 3 credit tokens, a twist of wire intended to reinforce the latch of the wolverine cage, a packet of Bravo tablets, 2 identity and work cards, and a length of cord. No rations save the Bravos, no extra charge for his stunner, but he did have, waiting down a loop on the jacket, a small atomic torch. The path he followed ended abruptly in a cliff drop, and Shann made a face at the odor rising from below, even though that scent meant he could climb down to the valley floor here without fearing any clack-clack attention. Chemical fumes from a mineral spring funneled against the wall, warding off any nesting in this section. Shann drew up the hood of his jacket and snapped the transparent face mask into place. He must get away, then find food, water, a hiding place. That will to live which had made Shann Lantee fight innumerable battles in the past, was in command, bracing him with a stubborn determination. The fumes swirled up in a smoke haze about his waist, but he strode on, heading for the open valley and cleaner air. That sickly lavender vegetation bordering the stream deepened in color to the normal purple-green, and then he was in a grove of trees. Their branches pointed skyward at sharp angles to the rust-red trunks. A small skitterer burst from moss-spotted ground covering, giving an alarmed squeak, skimming out of sight as suddenly as it had appeared. Shann squeezed between two trees and then paused. The trunk of the larger was deeply scored with scratches dripping viscous gobs of sap, a sap which was a bright froth of scarlet. Taggi had left his mark here, and not too long ago. The soft carpet of moss showed no paw marks, but he thought he knew the goal of the animals, a lake down valley. Shann was beginning to plan now. The Throgs had not blasted the Terran camp out of existence. They had only made sure of the death of its occupiers, which meant they must have some use for the installations. For the general loot of a survey field camp would be relatively worthless to those who picked over the treasure of entire cities elsewhere. Why? What did the Trogs want? And would the alien invaders continue to occupy the domes for long? Shann did not realize what had happened to him since that shock of ruthless attack. From early childhood, when he had been thrown on his own to scratch a living, a borderline existence of a living, on the dumps of Tyre, he had had to use his wits to keep life in a scrawny and undersized body. However, since he had been eating regularly from survey rations, he was not quite so scrawny anymore. His formal education was close to zero, his informal and off-center schooling vast, and that particular toughening process, which had been working on him for years, now aided in his speedy adaptation to a new set of facts, formidable ones. He was alone on a strange and perhaps hostile world. Water, food, safe shelter, these were important now. And once again, away from the ordered round of the camp, where he had been ruled by the desires and requirements of others, he was thinking, planning in freedom. Later, his hand went to the butt of his stunner. Perhaps later, he might just find a way of extracting an accounting from the beetle facers too. For the present, he would have to keep away from the Throgs, which meant well away from the camp. A fleck of green showed through the amethyst foliage before him, the lake. Shann wiggled through a last bush barrier and stood to look out over that surface. A sleek brown head bobbed up. Shann put fingers to his mouth and whistled. The head turned, black button eyes regarded him. Short legs began to churn water. To his gratification, the swimmer was obeying his summons. Taggi came ashore, pausing on the fine gray sand of the verge to shake himself vigorously. Then the wolverine came upslope at a clumsy gallop to Shann. With an unknown feeling swelling inside him, the Terran went down on both knees, burying both hands in the coarse brown fur, warming to the uproarious welcome Taggi gave him. "Togi?" Shann asked as if the other could answer. He gazed back to the lake, but Taggi's mate was nowhere in sight. The blunt head under his head swung around. Black button nose pointed north. Shann had never been sure just how intelligent, as mankind measured intelligence, the wolverines were. He had come to suspect that Fadakar and the other experts had underrated them, and that both beasts understood more than they were given credit for. Now he followed an experiment of his own, one he had had a chance to try only a few times before and never at length. Pressing his palm flat on Taggi's head, Shann thought of Trogs and of their attack, trying to arouse in the animal a corresponding reaction to his own horror and anger. And Taggi responded. A mutter became a growl. Teeth gleamed.